What happens when the system designed to protect the truth becomes the very fortress of deception? Darren Cole was a loyal insider, until betrayal shattered everything he believed in. Now, with his career, friendships, and reputation on the line, he must risk it all to expose a conspiracy that could cost millions of lives. But in a world ruled by silence and fear, is courage enough to bring justice? Darren Cole had always been a man of principle. As a senior systems analyst at Travant Technologies, a leading contractor for national defense systems, he had built his career on precision, confidentiality, and quiet integrity. The kind of man who was first to arrive and last to leave, whose moral compass had never flickered despite the high-stakes, ethically gray corridors he often navigated. But on a stormy Thursday evening, that compass began to quiver. It started with a pattern, one that didn't belong. Darren had been auditing data flows for a new AI-based missile defense project, codenamed Sentinel. Hidden beneath layers of encryption, he found an anomaly. Unauthorized code injections, subtle enough to avoid detection, yet dangerous enough to compromise the entire system. At first he thought it was a test, a decoy meant to simulate a breach, for security training. But as he dug deeper, he realized it was something far more insidious. This wasn't a test, it was sabotage. And the signature in the code, it belonged to Catherine Weller, the company's vice president of strategy, and once his closest confidant. Darren's hands trembled slightly as he closed the window on his screen. He leaned back in his ergonomic chair, heart pounding like a war drum. Catherine Weller had recruited him to Travant 5 years ago. They had shared late nights, built frameworks, and exchanged ideas about ethics in tech over whiskey and jazz. She had even defended him when a high-level general questioned his loyalty for flagging a flawed algorithm. And now her name was embedded in sabotage code. He knew what this meant. Not just for Catherine, but for him, for Travant. The entire military infrastructure depends on Sentinel's integrity. He locked his screen, grabbed his raincoat, and left the office, the neon lights of Langley blurring through the misty glass of the company lobby. The parking lot was nearly empty. As he reached his car, he hesitated. He could bury this, report it quietly, protect the company, or he could dig, expose the truth, and risk everything. He chose to dig. Over the next week, Darren worked like a man, possessed. Every lunch break, every late evening, every hour that didn't belong to his job belonged to the investigation. He mapped every code injection, traced email logs, cross-referenced login timestamps. Catherine had used her clearance to bypass the system's internal firewalls and route sensitive information, some of it classified, through obscure offshore servers. The final destination? A shell company based in Luxembourg. He recognized the name Etherian Analytics, a former subsidiary of Travant, sold off during a restructuring. Etherian had been quietly buying military patents, hiring rogue developers, and selling systems to foreign governments. But the damning piece was a voice memo embedded in one of the packet headers. An accident maybe, or a taunt. It was Catherine's voice. This system will never pass inspection, but they'll approve it anyway. They always do. She laughed, cold, unfamiliar. By the time anyone notices, it won't matter. Not to me. Darren sat in stunned silence. The person he thought he knew was gone. Or perhaps she had never truly existed. He compiled a secure dossier, timestamped evidence, audio files, code sequences, and metadata logs, and encrypted it across 3 offline drives. He trusted no cloud, no internal channel. When the time came, he would deliver it directly to the Department of Defense. But the company had eyes. Travant's head of cybersecurity, Blake Norwood, intercepted him in the elevator. "You've been digging into Sentinel's logs," Blake said, voice low. Darren froze. "I'm part of the audit team," Blake smirked. "You and I both know you're way past audit protocols." Darren stepped off the elevator. "If there's something you want to say it." Blake's voice turned cold. "You're either with us or against us. Don't become the latter." 2 days later, Darren found his security clearance revoked. His badge no longer granted him access to his floor. It had locked his credentials. He expected it. What he didn't expect was a summons. From Catherine. At a private lounge in Georgetown, she waited, poised, sipping a glass of red wine like nothing had changed. "You've been busy," she said. "You betrayed everything we built." She set the glass down. "Everything you thought we built." "Why?" Catherine exhaled, almost wistfully. "Do you think the defense industry plays fair? I've seen the backrooms, Darren. The real decisions aren't made in board meetings. They're made in shadows. I just decided to stop being the pawn." "You put lives at risk. So does every broken drone, every misfired missile, every compromised satellite." She leaned forward. "The system is already corrupt. I just chose to benefit from it." "You chose to betray your country." She tilted her head. "No, I chose to survive." Darren walked out into the rainy night, heart heavier than it had ever been. He had enough evidence to take her and Trayvon down, but the cost? Everything. He'd lose his job, his pension, his reputation, maybe even his freedom. He uploaded the dossier to a secure drive and mailed it, anonymously, to the Inspector General's office. The reckoning had begun. The media storm broke like a tidal wave. Anonymous whistleblower exposes fraudulent code in U.S. missile defense systems. Travant Technologies is under federal investigation. Unnamed executive linked to national security breach. Within days, headlines dominated. National broadcasts, congressional hearings were announced. The Department of Justice initiated a criminal investigation. Catherine Weller resigned to focus on personal matters. But it was far too late to hide. Darren remained silent, unnamed, invisible, until someone leaked his identity. He woke up to cameras outside his apartment, reporters shouting questions and neighbors staring through peepholes. "Mr. Cole, were you the whistleblower? Do you fear retaliation? Are you a patriot or a traitor?" His phone exploded with messages, some thanking him, others threatening him. Online forums speculated endlessly. Half the country called him a hero. The other half called him a liability. The FBI placed him under protective surveillance. He moved into a secure location. Every day his life became less his own, but the truth had momentum. In hearings broadcast live, government officials grilled Travant's executives. Darren watched in silence as senators held up snippets of his evidence. This code structure was traced to Luxembourg. How did your team miss this? Catherine Weller's email authorized unauthorized access. Is this standard protocol? No, Senator. Catherine, now under oath, looked diminished. The once commanding woman was gaunt, composed, but cold. Did you knowingly compromise national security? She paused. I took actions I believed necessary at the time. And those actions risked American lives? Silence. Yes. Charges were filed: conspiracy, fraud, obstruction of justice. Catherine faced up to 30 years. Travant's CEO resigned. The company's contracts were suspended. Stocks plummeted. Congress fast-tracked the Defense Tech Transparency Act. And Darren? He was asked to testify. Standing in front of the Senate Intelligence Committee, his hands didn't shake. I didn't do this for fame. I did it because someone had to. One senator asked, "And do you feel safe now?" "No," he replied. "But I feel right." In the months that followed, his world reassembled itself, piece by piece. He received invitations to speak at universities, ethics panels, think tanks. One day he opened an envelope from MIT, a visiting lecturer offer. Another came from Harvard's Kennedy School. A nonprofit offered him a leadership role in corporate accountability. But he remained cautious. Fame was fickle. Truth was permanent. In the quiet moments, he read the public letters Catherine had released from prison, carefully worded apologies, carefully curated remorse. But in one interview, she said something that struck him. People think betrayal begins with lies, but it starts with silence, with looking away. He clipped that line, saved it, because she was right. Darren moved to Cambridge, taking a fellowship in tech ethics. He designed a curriculum titled Silence and Systems, exploring the moral failures of modern innovation. Students loved it. Journalists covered it. He was becoming what he never aimed to be, a symbol. But he stayed grounded, took the train, ate alone, refused interviews. Not out of shame, but because the story was no longer his. It belonged to everyone who watched a friend choose silence, or choose it themselves. On the first anniversary of his testimony, Darren visited a small grave in Virginia. Catherine had taken her own life. The press called it a tragedy. Commentators debated her legacy. Darren left a single white flower on her headstone. "I hated what you did," he whispered, "but I never stopped hoping you'd come back from it." The wind answered nothing. 3 months later, Darren stood on the glass balcony of the Cambridge Institute for Tech Ethics, overlooking the Charles River. The wind tugged at his blazer. In the lecture hall behind him, a panel of tech leaders, whistleblowers, and legal experts was assembling. The first session was titled, "From Complicity to Courage, Changing the Corporate Culture of Silence." He never imagined being here. "Not in this way. Dr. Palmer's asking for you," said a staffer. He nodded and stepped inside. Rachel Palmer, a veteran of environmental research and a fellow whistleblower, had helped secure the Institute's funding. Their paths had been different, but their stories were similar. "You ready for your panel?" she asked. "Always," he smiled. The auditorium buzzed with attendees. Cameras rolled. Students filled the aisles, eyes wide with curiosity. Darren stepped to the podium. "Good afternoon. My name is Darren Cole. And a year ago, I helped dismantle one of the largest tech frauds in defense contracting history. But I'm not here to talk about revenge. I'm here to talk about responsibility." He shared his journey, not with bitterness, but with purpose. He spoke about the culture of silence that allowed corruption to thrive, and the courage required to break it, about the emotional toll of betrayal, the lonely road to justice, and the renewal that can follow destruction. Later, Darren walked through Harvard Yard, wrapped in thought. The energy of the campus filled the spring air, students debating philosophy, engineers sketching prototypes, and artists sketching murals. He admired it all. Ideas in motion, futures forming. He stopped by a bench and checked his messages. The Senate committee had responded. He'd been formally invited to consult on new transparency legislation for federal contractors. They needed frameworks. Real-world insight. He wasn't sure he was ready to step back into Washington's halls, but maybe this time, he'd have a voice. He looked up. A young student stood nearby, hesitant. "Mr. Cole? I was at your talk. It meant a lot. I'm studying data ethics, and I just wanted to thank you." Darren offered a modest smile. "The work you'll do matters more than any speech. Make sure it counts." One evening, back in his apartment, he poured himself a cup of tea and opened the leather-bound journal Catherine had once gifted him. A note had been tucked into the back pages. "I was wrong. You were right. About everything. If there's ever a future where we meet again, I hope it's one built on truth." He closed the journal, eyes misty but calm. Months passed. The new legislation, heavily influenced by Darren's input, passed the Senate by a sweeping majority. For the first time, defense tech companies would be required to submit quarterly compliance audits with third-party oversight. Whistleblower protections were expanded. A new generation of coders, engineers, and business leaders now study Darren's case as part of ethics training. He traveled, spoke at universities, advised startups, and led workshops on integrity and innovation. The quiet ones in the back rows, the ones taking the hardest notes, reminded him of himself. Curious, conscientious, ready. On the first anniversary of Travant's collapse, Darren returned to D.C. for a private memorial held by former employees. They weren't there to celebrate downfall, but rebirth. Catherine's name wasn't mentioned much, but her absence hung in the air. Afterward, Darren stood alone on the rooftop, watching the Potomac shimmer. Travis joined him, silent for a while. "You did what most of us only talk about. You stood up." Darren nodded. "And it cost more than I thought. Still worth it?" He thought for a long moment. "Yes." A week later, An invitation arrived. The United Nations was hosting a global technology and ethics summit in Geneva. Darren's keynote had been requested. He booked the ticket. Before leaving, he visited a quiet, unmarked grave just outside the city. It bore no name, just a phrase. Truth is the only legacy worth leaving. He placed a single white rose on the stone and whispered, "Rest well." As the plane lifted into the sky, Darren stared out the window, not toward an ending, but a horizon wide open with possibility.